Anyone who's watching, my name is Abby Moore, and welcome you to Harmonic Youth Orchestra's Summer Festival. This is the second day, and Professor Torgul is our second guest for today. We just talked to Professor Klutzel this morning. I'll just hand it over to Anna to introduce you.
All right, good afternoon, Professor Torgul. Like I said earlier, it's a pleasure. And I want to thank you again for taking this time to give back to the larger music community and sharing your experiences. To introduce myself before I ask you a ton of questions, my name is Anna Johnson. I'm the founder of Harmonic Youth Orchestra. So I started this organization because of the potential that I saw for love and joy and light and just happiness through music and performance and getting together and creating it all. Whether it's through performances, clinics, talks like these, just discussions, lessons, growth and power in music. And this organization is specifically targeted towards encouraging youth musicians. So the reason for that is because lifelong passion for music stems in those earlier stages. When you have all this curiosity and wonderment and excitement for the world, and you're introduced to the power of music. And I know that I wouldn't have, continued music as long as I did if I hadn't started when I was really young. So that being said, I'm a violinist as well. I've been playing, I've been playing since I was 5. I absolutely love the violin. Nobody in my family had played music before me. So it was pretty much just, I remember I was 5, I was watching Little Einsteins. I don't know if you know that show, but yes. I saw a violinist on it. And I was like, I want to be like her. And Exactly. And I went to rent a violin the next day and I was like, this is what I'm doing and I'm going for it. So right now I am a second year at UCLA. I'm actually studying public policy, but I am continuing music and always will. I am in the UCLA marching band. I play saxophone in that tenor saxophone.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so I did band and orchestra all throughout high school because I'm sure you understand there's such a crossover between different instruments. And when you start on an instrument like piano or violin, it's like you got all the instruments at your fingertips basically. It takes like a month. And then you understand. And then orchestra as well there, hopefully next year, not this year because of COVID. And that's me. So I'll be administering the Q&A with you. And I'm super excited. So I'm gonna start by reading a brief introduction for you, Professor Torgul. I got this from the PSB website. I left a few things out because there's a few things I couldn't pronounce, unfortunately. A lot of things actually, but I kept the things that I could pronounce, and you will obviously
no problem
elaborate on the things that I wasn't able to talk about. All right, awesome. So throughout his career, Turkish-American violinist Ertan Torgul has enjoyed an eclectic and multifaceted musical path. As a recitalist, chamber musician, soloist, concertmaster, and teacher, he has toured around the world and collaborated with some of today's most sought-after musicians and ensembles. Mr. Torgul has been a member of the award-winning SOLI Chamber Ensemble since 1996 and has served as its managing artistic director from 2011 until recently. Specializing in contemporary repertoire, the ensemble performs concerts on both national and international stage. A strong advocate of contemporary music and living composers, he's commissioned over 100 new works and recorded 6 CDs featuring commissioned works of American composers. Mr. Torgul currently serves as a lecturer of violin and chamber music at the University of California, Santa Barbara, an affiliate artist in violin at Moore School of Music at the University of Houston. And so now I'm sure, Professor Torgul, I have barely skimmed the surface of all the incredible things you've experienced. So to kick it off, I would just like to hear, a brief introduction of who you are, your journey, how you got into music, and how you got where you are today.
Sure. And first of all, thank you so much, you guys, for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this awesome festival. And organization is fantastic. I've been doing my research and looking at your website. This is a real treat for me. So anyway, thanks for having me on. So my journey, yeah, funny enough, I did start playing the violin terribly early. I started age 12, which is, somewhat late when we consider violin, right? Usually people start at 3, 4, 5. And when I was growing up in Turkey, we didn't have that culture of starting earlier. The conservatory basically started at age 12. After you graduated from elementary school, you the conservatory and applied and did these tests and all that kind of stuff. So that was the culture. But my love of music and violin started much earlier because my dad was the bass clarinet player in the opera and ballet in Ankara, which is the capital of Turkey. And so I grew up in the opera house. He used to take me to their rehearsals when I didn't have anything else to do, it's like no babysitters and all that. So I used to just roam around in the opera house, and it was this old-fashioned opera house that made everything. They made the shoes, the hats. So there were these workshops spread all around the opera house. And so I used to go visit each of those workshops and hang out with everyone who was just working. So I remember the smell of sawdust and glue and paint and varnish. Actually, they had a violin maker, which I visited very often. And then I remember being in the green room with the whole orchestra, during their break. They would be, chatting and laughing and drinking tea, which is a big thing, of course, in Turkey. And I remember these tactile things and visual things like inside of violin cases, these velvet or velour, insides with the, dark purples or reds and greens, all of this input somehow. And of course the sounds and the music. I knew at that time, I think I was probably 5. I knew that I was going to be a violinist, not just a musician, but actually I was going to play the violin. So that sort of carried through all of my life. And I've never had a moment in my life of not knowing what I was doing, which is, I think, very rare. And so sometimes I have moments of sort of, I have to stop myself with my students, it's like, how can you not know what you want to do? How is this possible? Because I never went through it. So I have to pull back a little bit and look at it from their point of view. But anyway, so I started my violin playing at age 12. And then I was admitted to a separate class in the conservatory. There was sounds really boastful, it's horrible, but for extraordinarily talented people thing. There were a few people who were in that class with me. One of them is a Turkish composer pianist, Fazıl Say, who's doing a lot of incredible things around the world. And so there were 5 of us, I believe. And so we had a different curriculum. We went through the schooling faster with the intent of basically studying abroad. So because of my connections to America, my grandparents were American citizens in California. I moved here first and studied in Sacramento with a great teacher, William Barbini, who was a concertmaster of Sacramento Symphony, sorry. And then after that, I went to study with Franco Gulli, who's an incredible Italian soloist of his time at Indiana University. So, and the funny story is that I grew up with his Mozart recordings. My dad had all these LPs of all the 5 concertos that he had played. And I remember listening to that when I was younger, and I just wanted to be just like him. So when I found him in Indiana, I had to go study with him. So that was my big treat for myself. And so then I ended up in New World Symphony for a couple of years. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that program. Of course, it's a fantastic place where young professionals get to sort of continue their growth and audition for orchestras and stuff off of it. Great opportunities there. And so later on, I ended up in San Antonio as the associate concertmaster, then later concertmaster for 17 years. And so in the past few years, I've been just concentrating on chamber music and teaching. I've kind of left the orchestral side of things a little bit, had enough, you know. And that's my journey, basically. That's what brings me here.
So I have a quick question for you before I get into a more open-ended question. This comes from me. So you mentioned you had studied in Sacramento and then in Indiana as well. Were these under like specific degree programs, or were these with just individuals on your own, separate from any music school?
Right. No, this was Sacramento State was the school that my teacher, Bill Barbini, was teaching in. So I went in as a master's student at age 18 because I was done with my bachelor's. So I was just kind of starting my master's. So I started my master's there, but then again, another funny story. Bill's wife, also a fantastic violinist, Kineko, who actually studied with Mr. Gulli in Italy. So we made this connection, and they put me in touch with them. So I went and auditioned for him. And so when I went to Indiana, I started a master's program there. Later on, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, you know, what not to do maybe in that kind of realm. Later on, because I was just a performer, I just wanted to perform. That's all I wanted to do, whether it was chamber music or solos or orchestra or whatever. I switched my degree to performance diploma instead. It was quicker, you know, there was a little bit less involved. And so I got that degree from Indiana instead of a master's. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Yeah, so they were under degree programs.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So I'm going to move on to our next question. And that is, what is the audition process like when competing for top spots in an orchestra? And like, how do you prepare? What components did they ask for? And these are for our young students who are looking for a career in performance. So basically, what are they getting themselves into in terms of getting a foot in the door?
Well, first of all, I encourage everybody who wants to pursue that, of course. It's a fantastic feeling being part of such a large group of people who are all working for the same goal, you know, making music, you know, creating great performances. There's really nothing like it. Chamber music is very different from orchestral and vice versa. So whoever wants to go in it, I absolutely encourage them. What it takes though is very different than working with a teacher on your regular repertoire. You know, basically the process is you send your resume in, the job opening, you find, you know, International Federation of Musicians, you know, paper in the old days. Now it's all online, which is great. You find the opening of the orchestra that you're interested in, you send your resume, and if you are accepted as part of that sort of determination, you get invited along upwards of probably 70, 80, and 90 people. And you receive a list of things you have to prepare. They're usually excerpts. Some orchestras will give actually full pieces, like Beethoven 3, you know, Beethoven 9, Beethoven 5. There are no actual excerpts listed, so you have to prepare the whole thing, which is happening a little less and less, but it's an interesting way of looking at it. They're basically saying, if you have the experience, come and audition. If you don't, maybe, you know, you may want to hold off. But so you get the list, you have your concerto movements, your romantic concerto, your Mozart, and your Bach, and your excerpts, and you prepare all of these things and go to your audition. It's usually completely anonymous. There's usually a screen. There's usually a carpet on the stage wherever you're playing, so that you can't tell if it's someone wearing high heels or if it's male or female walking, you know. So they try to make it as equitable as possible. And, you know, it's a very difficult thing. I'm sorry, I'm making a lot of noise here, aren't I? Let me turn this off. Sorry about that. Anyway, so you basically have about 10 minutes to impress a group of people who've been playing in an orchestra for forever, probably. it's a very difficult process to play so perfectly for such a short time. And that's where the difficulty of preparation comes in. You have to prepare very differently than your own lessons or even performances like concertos and sonatas and recitals and things of that sort. Anyway, so continuing, so there are usually different rounds, and if you make the finals, usually 2 or 3 rounds. If you make the finals, sometimes the screen will come down. Sometimes there's a chamber music round, sometimes there isn't. And at the end, hopefully you're victorious, and you get that one job that was open in that orchestra and probably won't open again for another 10 years. So having said all of this, it's the job market as far as the orchestra is concerned, it's not a large one. So when an opening happens, you do have a lot of people applying, a lot of hopefully qualified people. So the competition is pretty fierce. And the prep for it, honestly, is you are trying to be as consistent of a player as you're trying to be. Basically, you have to play the excerpts of you okay there?
Yeah, my light just fell on me. I'm all
Decided.
Good
though. Okay. So basically, let's take an excerpt, right? Let's take Mendelssohn's Scherzo. For violin, of course, it's a lot of off the string stuff, right? There's a lot of accuracy involved. There's a lot of string crossings. It has to line up, left hand, right hand coordination, not losing your spiccato throughout all of it. You have to practice it in such a way that basically whenever you pick it up, you execute it exactly the same way. It has to be so consistent. You can't let anything, we always tell our students, don't let anything go, be really critical, self-critical, well, assess, maybe critical is a bad word, but the orchestral audition is just basically, you're really trying to perfect your stroke, and you want to execute it every time exactly the same way. And that's why it's so important to have the right style, right dynamics, it's so difficult. It's sort of hard to explain because it's a different world. And there are some players who really function amazingly well in that. So, people who are very, very detail-oriented, very self-critical, and they excel usually in that kind of preparation. But, anybody can do it. It just takes a lot of time and brain power, and a lot of testing of yourself all the time. You wake up, the first thing you do is play the Mendelssohn Scherzo. You open your violin or leave your violin open, tune your violin and play the Scherzo. See if you can do it, late at night, for example. You wake up, 12 o'clock, 1 a.m., you get up, you try to play the Mendelssohn Scherzo absolutely perfectly every time. So you're trying to train yourself like an athlete to execute this group of pieces in exactly the best possible way you can, and hope that that's going to carry through during the audition process, which, is difficult. Obviously, you're nervous and, things go away. I can get into more detail if you want, but, that's basics of how to prepare.
Yeah, no, the live audition is something that I've always thought about. Most of my auditions for various ensembles throughout high school were recordings. So I've actually never been in that situation where it's like a one and done live blind performance. And just thinking about that, you could prepare for that for years, and then you go in there and it's like you get a little shaky or something goes wrong. Yep. And it's just such high stakes and such little time, as you were saying. And that always baffles me, just thinking about that.
It is.
Work so hard, and it's one
exactly.
moment.
And not only the work itself, which is long hours and for months at a time, because you find out the repertoire and the opening usually 2-3 months ahead. So you have to start right away preparing for it. And there are, of course, steps you can take to ensure that you're progressing properly and all that kind of stuff. But But not only the time commitment, there's also a financial commitment to it too, because you have to travel to this place, you have to have a hotel room, you have to eat, you have to fly there or drive there or whatever, you know, your circumstances are. So there's also the monetary stuff. So you're investing a large chunk of time and resources to audition somewhere. So my real advice to anybody who wants to do this is commit to that audition fully. I mean, don't apply if you're not willing to actually do the work, because what happens is you keep preparing, and then, you know, you get cold feet a couple of weeks before, and so now you've sort of lost, you know, months of stuff. You know, you have to have your heart in it, basically, and invest. And who, I will never forget this, she wanted to play in the Chicago Symphony with Sir George Solti, and that was her goal. She was going to do it. That the only orchestra she wanted to play in. So luckily, of course, for her, they had recordings of almost all of the excerpts under their belt. You know, all the Beethoven excerpts, you know, the Brahms excerpts, Mahler, you know, all of that was available to her. She bought all those recordings with George Solti and listened to all those excerpts absolutely, and wrote everything she could, you know, whether it was bow strokes or, you know, unlike YouTube back then, we didn't really have the visual. Now you can kind of watch everybody and kind of write bowings and stuff. Ooh, that's what they do. But she literally listened to it so carefully, she could even know, like, when they were going up on the V string, or if they were staying on the G string, or, you know, the sonorities and stuff. She built her audition to absolutely fit the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. She went there, she played, and they loved her, right? She's in the finals. So the screen comes down, you know, Solti is there, you know, he's sort of asking her different excerpts, and, you know, she's ready for him. And then, of course, oh, I forgot, there's also sometimes sight reading, which doesn't happen as often anymore, but it can be, so you got to be ready for it. So he asked her something that she had never heard the orchestra play before. And I don't remember what piece it was. And so she started playing, and he stopped her. She said something like 6 times, and made her do it slightly differently this way, slightly differently that way. And funny enough, it ended up, she thought she lost the audition. You know, she went backstage, and she has her head in her hands, and she's just like, oh my God, I blew it, you know. It turned out that was the reason she got hired, because she was flexible enough to be able to do stuff that he was asking her to do. So, you know, go figure. It's like, you never know what's going to happen, but it's a pretty grueling process.
Totally. I had a follow-up question on that, specific to these past few years, or I guess year going on 2. So in terms of the audition processes for orchestra, I'm curious as to how COVID has impacted the process that you've described, specifically because, like I had mentioned, so many of my auditions in high school were through recording. And I didn't really have any recording equipment or anything. And I would just, you know, go in my room and record. There would be background noise. I mean, I was young. I wasn't that worried about it. I'm just like, I'm going to play and send it to them. But then there would be some of my friends who would get it professionally recorded and probably altered and all of these things. And so I always found that really hard to keep equitable, as you'd mentioned, because you said they tried to keep it as equitable as possible by doing these blind auditions in person. And so I'm wondering how COVID has affected the audition, and if COVID, I guess, has made it harder to achieve that fairness in auditions.
That's an interesting question. I'm not 100% sure what the orchestras are doing right now. Do you mean something like maybe, you know, asking for recordings from people instead of having them in person? I actually have not heard too many of those instances. What happened, to my knowledge, again, you know, there are probably some exceptions here and there. In the past, every so often, orchestras would ask the candidate to send a recording. And they were very specific about it. They wanted it live. They wanted it one take. They didn't want editing. They didn't want all of that. Of course, how could they tell when the editing is so perfect these days that it wasn't edited? That's beyond point right now. But other than that, we didn't have very many auditions like that. You just had this preliminary thing where they would pick people. They would say, okay, well, this person sounded good on paper, but they're not sounding great. They just don't have the experience, so they would, not invite them. So that was the process. Now, I have not heard any audition process since COVID hit that recordings were replacing the live audition. What happened, to my knowledge, is basically all the audition processes have stopped. The orchestras basically just stopped auditioning. Nothing was announced. I mean, if you saw the paper, the union paper, there were no openings for months, or a year, basically. Now they're coming back, but they're all coming back in person, mostly. And I'm sure there are restrictions with the vaccinations and all that kind of stuff, which I'm not involved anymore. But so I think that they're still putting a lot of emphasis in that live audition, and I don't think they're hiring people through just their recordings. Now, video would be probably comparable to the live in the sense that, you're seeing the person playing something in one take and not spliced necessarily. But then that kind of screws up the whole equity thing because you get to see the person. So now it's male or female, or tall or short, or they're holding their violin a little awkward or not, because that shouldn't matter at the, audition process, because they could sound amazing, but they might have a different type of technique. So anyway, long story short, I think that the auditions are coming back the way they are. What I hope is that everybody wants to take auditions practiced while they were cooped up in the house and ready to go when the jobs just open up, So that, to me, that's kind of the advantage that we have for a whole year. You can just sit down and clean up your Schumann scherzo like nobody's business, right?
Right. Thank you for sharing that, because, I, as I'm sure many of the people listening in, I just wasn't aware of the audition process, and I'm really glad to hear that they're all kind of live, because that was a major frustration I had going through auditions, at the lower level, was a lot of them were just not fair, because it was just people had different access to different recording or editing or stuff like that. And I had a lot of frustration with that as a younger musician. And so know that that's kind of erased, and it's kind of a blank slate, and it's done equitably.
Right. It's funny enough, just to elaborate on that just for a second, I know we have a lot of other questions, but I highly recommend everyone now, because I had to do this during COVID time. I mean, I'm technologically pretty open anyway, but I think what happened is we learned a lot of sort of sound editing, video editing skills, through Logic Pro or Final Cut Pro, these apps that now you can have on your laptop and or even your iPad, and just kind of be able to create videos and recordings for yourself. But what I would really recommend now, just to sort of try to balance things a little bit, get a USB mic. They're so cheap now. It's not cost prohibitive anymore. Because when you wanted to buy a mic in the olden days, you needed a board, and you get the mic, and then you had to have like some sort of program you had to put that into. You really don't have to do that anymore. Just get a decent mic, plug it into your iPad or iPhone or any kind of phone, and your quality increases like tenfold already, right? So my biggest advice to all the people who will be watching, hopefully, is to just invest anywhere from like 40 to 80 bucks or something, and you'll get a decent enough mic to be able to play into and get so much more out of it.
Thank you. Yeah, that was actually something I was looking into last night, because I'm working on writing some songs right now.
Great.
And I was on Amazon scrolling last night looking for a microphone. So very timely suggestion.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Moving on to the next talking point. The next question that we have is, can you discuss the different career options in the music field? I think a lot of younger musicians kind of see it as either you're going into performance or you're going into teaching. So if you could elaborate on any other opportunities within the industry or field, that would be fantastic.
Right. I think that, you know, I was very lucky that, you know, I had opportunities to take advantage of certain things along the way throughout my career. And I was very lucky because of that. And in most cases, I took advantage of it. And so within the performance, of course, there are different ways of sort of defining what performance is. And in teaching is the same thing. So within those two large categories, you know, you already have a lot of options. And but your question is, outside of those options, what can we do? So what I did for about 10 years, I actually ran my group. My SOLI Chamber Ensemble which you read a little bit, is a contemporary ensemble, and it's like a messiaen instrumentation, so like clarinet, violin, cello, and piano. And we've commissioned a lot of works. We put on concerts, we tour, we have educational programs and things like that. So I became the managing director and artistic director of that ensemble. Now, I was still a member, so I was still performing with them. But you can actually pursue arts administration type of route being a musician. If performance and teaching is not your thing, I think arts administration is a fantastic way to sort of stay in the business and also truly be able to do some good. I mean, because as a trained musician and not just an administrator who, let's say, you know, there are two very qualified people coming from, let's say, a nonprofit sector, right? But it's not music. It's you know, it could be anything. It could be children's services, could be family services. It could be, you know, maybe pet adoption, or, you know, I mean, all of those are fantastic things. The administrative part of it is going to be very similar. But I think that if, as a musician, and you're staying in the music part of things as an administrator, you have a much deeper understanding of what needs to happen and what is artistically being asked by the artistic director or the ensemble, and why that is important, why, or how to structure it so that you can actually help the group. And instead of saying, we don't have money for this, you know, we can't raise money for this because it's not, you know, something that's sexy enough for the donors or something, you would think twice before you say that. You know, it's like infrastructure stuff, right? Like buying stands. You don't want to just go to someone saying that we need stands. Could you give us some money? You know, a couple of $100. They were like, you know, I'm not quite sure. But as an administrator coming from the music business, you can actually frame that very differently and be able to achieve that. Now, the other person who could be very, very good at their job may not see that as a, you know, important point and may not want to pursue it so much. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, and I'm not saying that non-music sector people will be bad for organizations. That's not really what I'm saying, but it does help knowing what music, musicians, audiences, and arts in general really require. So that's a fantastic way of contributing, because let's say, you know, you've applied to a bunch of orchestras, you didn't get in as a violinist, you know, and you were burnt out, you don't want to pursue it anymore, and you hate teaching. So perfect. So Anna can now start looking at, wait a minute, how can I help SOLI Chamber Ensemble as the managing director? So what you need for that is, of course, experience in certain, you know, like Excel and, you know, Word, and in some cases, sometimes Adobe products, you know, for marketing and, you know, and putting out, you know, brochures, things of that sort. So you have a lot of hats you can wear, and that's what I was able to do. And it was really fantastic. It was really, really interesting because writing contracts, negotiating fees, travel arrangements. And when you're a managing director of smaller groups, you are wearing all the hats. You know, you're not part of like a big symphony orchestra where there's a marketing director and a fundraiser and all that kind of stuff. But you're doing basically everything. So that was really fantastic. I learned a lot of Adobe tricks, you know, InDesign and Illustrator and creating artwork, you know, all that kind of stuff. So basically, you can still stay creative, but with that, you can actually help the infrastructure of a group like maybe Eighth Blackbird or SOLI Chamber Ensemble or So Percussion. So all these incredible sort of modern music ensembles that are out there, and they need help. So that's one route. The other route is, again, maybe kind of the marketing end of things. I think that you can specialize, to a point, specialize in sort of the music or arts industry for, you know, the marketing purposes. You know, again, designing products, designing artwork, basically anything in that creative realm really boosts an ensemble like mine, for example. Like if your stuff looks good, your pictures or your artwork and all of that, immediately the eye is drawn to it. So you stay on my website because of it, right? So it becomes essential. You know, you become an essential part of something, but you're not necessarily playing your instrument to do it. So that's a couple of things that just on top of my head that pops into the you know, as far as the industry thing. And now, unlike my time when I was going to school, now there are opportunities in schools to take advantage of these kinds of classic school. But if they're not, you can always take them as electives, or you know, you can always search for them, or just go be fly on the wall if you have time to be able to kind of learn these types of tools that we need to kind of get good at. Because the days of us doing one thing and finishing our career doing that one thing at age whatever, 80, 90, hopefully, it's over. It's really not as plausible anymore. And I think we need to diversify more, especially the younger generation, because attention spans are shorter. You know, there are things that like, you know, TikTok, YouTube, you know, many more that's going to come. That basically is like 10, 15 seconds. You have to capture people. You don't capture them, they go away. They click away and they go somewhere else. So we need to kind of reinvent, bolster our knowledge of what people want and how we can actually get our message, without diluting it, get our message to people quickly. If we can achieve that, then we can keep them a little bit longer, you know, and then the goal is to, of course, turn them into ticket buyers, right? Or followers, or, you know, whatever, that kind of thing. So all those aspects that goes into the performance is incredibly important.
I actually, the other day, I was listening to a TED Talk on that, how that traditional nature of how we view our career is just drastically changing. And I've just heard that from so many people lately. I'm like, wow, this is really happening right now. And that versatility and flexibility is so important, as you were mentioning. That kind of brought me back to that story you were telling about the violinist who they picked her because she was able to adapt and able to be flexible. Right. That is kind of a metaphor to everything. You have a broad skill set and you're able to adapt and adjust. And going off of that versatility, actually, we just got a live question in the chat that says, Professor Kloetzel spoke earlier about always saying yes and making things happen for yourself. How do you think that way of thinking contributes to your own musical versatility?
That's an interesting question, because it's like what you're saying yes to, of course, is, you know, if we don't define it, that's a little bit too broad, you know. But I know what she means because she's one of my best friends, and I know I know where she's coming from. So yes, you say yes to everything that she's actually meaning, which is all these opportunities that come your way. You know, I'll give you an example of sort of the weird fearlessness that we need to have a little bit as musicians. As I'm going, of course, I'm approaching from a performance point of view right at this moment, but I was approached to play a concert by San Antonio Symphony. So, you know, I had sort of a yearly concerto performance with them. Sometimes, you know, we would skip a year or whatever, but mostly, and the conductor who was going to be conducting that concert requested that I play Ravel Sigan and Chasson Poème on the same program. And I had never played those pieces in school at that time, right? Well, Chasson I had, but Ravel Sigan I hadn't. So my immediate reaction was yes. Now, it's crazy because, you know, as a violinist, you know, people may know that, you know, Ravel Sigan is a pretty difficult piece. It's going to require quite a bit of commitment. But my initial reaction was yes, I'm going to do this. And that fearlessness, you know, I ended up playing it and you know, didn't fall on my face. So I'm still here. So that's good. But it's that moment of like, take the leap, you know, take the advantage, take what's coming to you, grab it and make something of it, because they don't come around that often. You know, there's a lot of people now who are playing solos. You know, certainly quartet world is definitely inundated with a lot of young quartets. You know, when you look 10, 15 years ago, you know, you had the selected people, and then you had sort of the BC level people. But now it's just everybody's in the forefront. You know, everybody can be visible through, you know, the globalization of everything, you know, with YouTube videos. You know, I mean, you can just go watch Berlin Philharmonic, just, you know, 5 minutes later, right? You can switch to Royal Philharmonic and you can watch those guys. You can do that now. You weren't able to. So I guess what I'm saying is that be fearless, go after things that you want, and try to develop that feeling of what is it that I want in my life, and what is it that I have to do to get there. And I think it's an important conversation you have to have with yourself, because if playing with orchestras is not your thing, then you need to divert your energies into something else, right? You don't want to be staying or playing with an orchestra, like as an orchestral musician. If that's not your thing, maybe try it, but then don't, you know, go another direction. Say yes to something else, you know, when it comes to the, and I forgot the second part of the question there, Anna.
It was how that attitude contributes to your own musical versatility.
Well, good. I think I already spoke to that. It's basically that fearlessness, saying yes to it. Like, for example, my managing director and artist director stint for 10 years. You know, I didn't know how to negotiate contracts. I mean, there's a, you know, you're a basically smart person. You're going to say, look, I want 5,000, not 3,000. Yeah, that's a negotiation, fine. But how do you sort of find ways of getting what you need and what you want out of it? You know, I'd never done it. I never wrote a grant. I had not created a poster before, you know, like, I mean, all these sort of aspects is what you might be doing. And I said yes to it. I said, yeah, I'm, you know, because I had left the orchestra for various reasons, because I was living farther away and didn't want to travel, all that kind of stuff. So it's a long story, but I just basically kind of said, okay, I've done orchestras all my life and I'm sort of done, and I want to do something else. So then this opportunity came and I said yes right away. I didn't even think about it, you know. And that taught me so many things. I mean, so many skills, but also so many life lessons, you know, so making all these mistakes that I made, you know. forgetting to do something very crucial about a contract, for example, or something, you know, adding a language that needed to be there to cover us, you know, legally or whatever, you know, forgetting those kinds of things and fretting over it. But like all those lessons that you learn, you apply to your everyday life as well as your performing life. You know, it's like, okay, let me take a step back and let me assess where am I with this piece? can I play this piece? Or what do I need to practice? You know what I mean? It's like you build these skills of knowing what you need to do, what steps to take. So yeah, I would say, and then commit. I mean, I think that's the other thing. Be fearless, but then when you take that opportunity, then you commit. Just total commitment and get it done. It can't be, I'll try it for a little bit and see, you know, because you have a lot of people who are depending on you when you're kind of an administrator type, you know, to set up these things. And so you can't let people down, you know, you have to have that commitment also. And to yourself, of course, which is probably more important, I think. So fearlessness and then commitment.
Beautiful. I love it. So looks like I have about 3 more questions to ask you at this point.
All right.
The first
I'll try to be shorter. Am I talking too much?
No,
Okay.
I love all the things you have to say. You're making my job easier too. I just get to sit and listen to all these amazing things you have to say. I love it.
Right,
you're fantastic. So the next question is, you know, obviously all the people listening, you know, obviously there had to be a lot of closed and open doors that came through the whole process of getting to where you are. And a lot of uncertainty at times, a lot of unpredictability, a lot of struggles, a lot of, am I gonna get into this orchestra? Hardest parts of the career you chose, and how did you get through them?
That's a very good question. Gosh. You know, as I said, you know, the thing that was different for me, and again, this is since you're asking me my personal journey, because I had such a clear idea of good or bad, you know, when I had that idea, but I mean, it turned out to be good for me. But you know, I never had any questions about what, since maybe 5 or 6, and then I pursued that getting into the conservatory. I pursued that further. I mean, I was lucky that I had a talent to be able to play, you know, because it can happen too. You may have but you just not built for it, you know, whether it's psychologically or physically, or, you know, it's just, and that's not a bad thing. To know that, to move on to something else is, you know, takes courage as well. I was very lucky that I didn't have to, so I continued that path. So I would say what I had to deal with was, do I sort of do this general idea of I'll play solos, to do I become a chamber musician, or do I sort of do the orchestral route? Now, I'm not a you know, world-renowned soloist like, you know, Josh Bell or Augustin Hadlick, and, you know, all these fantastic people who are doing what they're doing. And so I had to do these self-assessment things, right? Okay, so I had to say to myself, well, you have a certain amount of talent, you have this, you have that. Can you see yourself doing this? And you have to be very brave to say no, I think. You know, and that's not necessarily saying give up, but I think that, you know, a true self-assessment is a very difficult thing to do when you're younger. We always look to our teachers to tell us that if we're good enough to do this, or we're not good enough to do this, right? And I try not to do that with my students. And one of my students, you know, I guess sometimes he's upset with me, thinking that I'm, you know, controlling somehow something, or thinking that he's not good enough. And but my goal is to get him to this higher goal through taking steps, right? So for me, it was questions like that. Can I do that? Is that really what my character is, or can I handle that? You know, am I on the level of what I think a person should be doing this? And so those were the real turning moments for me. Being mindful about how good I was and how not good enough I was for something else, right? So solo wise, what I ended up doing is I ended up taking advantage of my given situations and be able to do solos with orchestras and enjoyed it immensely. But I didn't make it like a career like James Ennis playing a different concerto for, you know, 30 weeks out of the, I mean, sorry, yeah. You know, it's like 10 months out of the year or something like that, you know. And they're amazing for doing that, which is, you know, you're in awe watching them. So I took a different route and I said, okay, so what do I do? So chamber music was my big love, and it still is. And I was in a quartet, I was in a string quartet, was doing competitions and getting somewhere, but we had, you know, issues like every string quartet does, you know, whether it's someone winning an orchestral job somewhere or someone not getting along with somebody or whatever. So we were building it, and it didn't quite develop into what we needed to. So then we had to basically all of us pivot somewhere else. So that was a turning point. So I had to ask, okay, what do I want? What do I want to do? And so I'm the type of person who wants to have a true input, direct input, like in chamber music, for example. So I went the route of sort of being more of a leadership position in orchestras. There's nothing wrong with playing in a section. It's fantastic. It's very rewarding. I've done it for many years too. And but my character was such that I knew myself that I wanted to have that input. So I did a soaking with your colleagues, and there's this building of the piece that you're directly involved in, you know. So I enjoyed that a lot. Those were sort of the turning points. You know, like you said, the door closes, and then where's the other door? You know, so you're just kind of take a flashlight and look around in yourself, saying, okay, wait a minute. So what can I do now? Like what am I interested in? And if that process is a little bit more ongoing, you know, if it's not just when you hit something that you start searching, if you already kind of have an idea about what types of things you're interested in, then the pivoting will be a lot quicker, obviously. You know, it's like, oh, this didn't work out. You know, I didn't enjoy this so much. You know, like I played concertmaster in an orchestra for 3 years, and it wasn't a good fit for me. And I didn't want to continue it. So I was immediately able to sort of pivot away because I already had sort of ideas about what I wanted, you know, in my life. So it was easier. But if it was sort of like I said no to it, or they got rid of me or whatever because it wasn't working out, and I sort of stopped and then just start kind of looking around. What do I do? What do I do now? How do I make money? You know, because life gets in the way. I mean, we all have to have sort of these basic things we need to do. You know, you have to make a certain amount of money, hopefully have a roof over your head, and those of us with families, you know, later on in life, you know, you have responsibility. So you can't just sort of be this egotistical musician. So I don't want this, blah, blah, blah. I'll just sit on the couch for a couple of months and figure it out. You know, you don't really have time for that. But anyway, so those turning points, I think search what interests you. And I think that develop those things while you're still doing something else. And if something happens and closes, then you have an easier pivot point to be able to kind of go to. For me, the real sort of anchoring of my career was chamber music. I wanted to do it for a living, didn't work out, did kind of the orchestra thing, but I kept the chamber music going. I joined SOLI, and SOLI became bigger and more well known. I was able to let go of the orchestra, and so chamber music was still there. And then the teaching started, you know, with UCSB and U of H, and chamber music is the pillar still within that. Like Professor Colette, you know, play together. For example, so in a way, chamber music was the thing. You know, when I look back, orchestral certainly music for me. You know, so if that's the question, I don't know how to answer that, because for me, this is it. You know, and sometimes my wife, you know, would ask me, "Well, if you can't play the violin, what would you do? I mean, you're still a person. You know, what would you do?" I have no idea. I really don't know. But I would do something else within the music world, you know, say I lost my hand or something horrible like that. I probably would find another way of being creative within sort of my world. And that's how I did it. I don't know if this answers the question exactly, but it's just my experience.
No, that's fantastic. I love how you're so passionate about exactly what you do, because you're right. That is very rare. And a lot of people do not have that blessing to have their one thing that they love and they're passionate about, and they know that they want to do it.
I was very lucky. It's not easy.
That's fantastic. Yeah, you are very lucky. And it's inspiring. And I'm really happy for you as well. Like that makes me really happy. It shows in the way you talk about it and the passion you have for it. And
I'm so glad.
Yeah, and the fact that you're willing to, you know, to support music and be here for this nonprofit and for us, as you know, we're trying to do the same mission. So
absolutely,
I'm really glad to hear that. So I have a quick question it's kind of, you can take it on a deeper level, but it could really apply to anything, but it's something that I'm interested in, because very few people get to the level of mastery that you have at this particular instrument. Very few people. And I think, you know, when you're young and you're learning an instrument, a lot of people, you know, do instrument when they're younger, go to college, do something else. When you're learning at the earlier stages, it's so linear. It's like you learn this year, and you just keep with this particular instrument and skill. Do you think that you could get better? Like, is there a point where you're like, I've mastered this in one particular skill, or is there always opportunity to get better? And like, how does that work? Like, does progress slow? Does progress change? Do you focus on different things once you get to that mastery?
Right. Great question. First of all, I can tell you that there are some masters out there for sure. You know, you hear people like, you know, James Ennis, for example. You know, he can play anything at any speed, and you know, and incredible amount of memory, right? It's like everything's memorized. I mean, he played one of the hardest concertos that was ever written by Aaron J. Kurnitz, which is a brand new piece a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, from memory in live performances. And I mean, it's one of the hardest pieces for the violin that I've ever heard. Because it's a very different language too. So it's not like, you know, Brahms, which is also incredibly difficult, but it's a lot more familiar. We train with that language, you know, so we have familiarity with it, so we know what to do. But new pieces, right? So there are some masters, I would say, but even those guys would support me on this. There's never a moment I was good enough and that was it. Never. I think that every day I pick up the violin, and the days I don't pick up the violin, most of all, I think about how much better I need to get to sort of express this inner thing we have as performers. It's not just about playing the piece, it's playing the piece from within, right? So it's not just what's on the page, but it's to filter through yourself. And that can be physical, like playing the violin, you know, physical things we do to achieve that, but there's also the emotional stuff. So how do you have the emotional stuff be supported by the physical stuff so that the execution is out there and I move somebody in the audience? You know, my motto is, if I moved one person, I've done my job. Hopefully it's more, but you know, I'm okay with one. If someone goes home sort of feeling like they've been elevated a little bit higher than they were when they walked in, I'm actually really happy. But as far as the master thing, I really don't think that any of us really truly achieve that feeling of I'm done, you know? So therefore, the improvement is constant. And yes, it slows down a little bit, you know, because physically, once we're a little bit older, you know, we physically respond slightly differently. But I've known a lot of incredible players in their 60s, 70s, 80s still play remarkable stuff, remarkable ease. And so the physical is not it. It's about striving. It's always looking to improve on something, you know. It's not just sort of the little tangible things like, you know, I want to do my scales faster, you know, or I want my spiccato faster or slower or more accurate or whatever. But it's sort of everything, you know. Musically, how can I have the emotion I'm feeling when I play this piece? How can I have that develop into a certain type of sound, you know? And there's technical things to it. You know, you move your sound point maybe a little bit, you know, lighter bow, heavier bow, faster bow, maybe a certain type of vibrato. I mean, there are these technical things associated with it, but it's such a blend that it's beyond the technical, you know. So I think when you get to the point where you can play the violin, let's say, right, basically, there's always intonation to work on, and that's never going to go away for anybody. As far as that's concerned, everybody's working on it all the time. No one is perfectly in tune, but we try to find a way to be as close to perfect as possible. We get close some days and we don't get close other days. I mean, I've heard some incredible soloists have bad days. It's normal, it's okay. So you know what they're gonna do? They're going to practice the next day. They're just going to think about that all night long, why they missed that particular passage, and they're just going to work on it. So that work never stops. And in a way, as a young person, I think it is good to incorporate that feeling of I'm never going to be done. I'm always. Then you won't be like disappointed later on, like, oh, I'm done, you know. I mean, we have this sort of, and my orchestral friends are going to kind of send me notes on this, but you know, there is a moment in an orchestral career sometimes where people sort of slow down their progress, like because they've achieved, you know, they know how to play Mahler. They don't really need to look at it so much, you know. They don't kind of put in the time as much, and then kind of achieve the status quo kind of thing. And when that happens, for us, I think, in general, the status quo doesn't actually work. It actually starts to decline because the amount of work we need to put into, it's like treading water. You know, you're working really hard treading water to stay above. You're not getting anywhere, but you're just trying to keep your head above the water. And we still have to work, make that happen. So when we don't, we're slowly sinking, you know? And so I'm always trying for myself to keep up my playing as often as I possibly can and work on stuff, certain skills, but also just my musicality, what I want to say, thinking about the music. And for example, my quartet and I are going to play the Razumovsky Opus 59 number 2, Beethoven, in a couple of weeks. So I'm preparing for that. So I'm playing second violin on it. And so I'm just trying to think about how can I be an integral part of this particular section with my part, because it's important at that point, in course study and all that. What can I do sound-wise to sort of like bolster that moment? You know, so that's what I was working on before we met online here. So there's always that kind of attitude that you have to have. You're never good enough. You can always improve. Having said that, you shouldn't be hard on yourself too much either. I mean, be hard on yourself when you're working, but when you're performing, you have to let go. You have to be okay with things being missed. You're going for it, you know, you're giving everything you've got. Maybe you even change a fingering during the performance. You know, you just go up on the A string, decide to do that last minute. Just go for it. Sometimes it may not work out, but other times it could just be that moment that you were looking for. So don't be afraid to fail, but once you fail, learn from that failure how to do it better next time. So that's sort of my advice on keep going in your career. You know, never ends.
Thank you. Yeah, and as you were talking about that, and constant practicing and keeping up, I'm like, I see that open violin case in the background. I'm like, you're a hard worker. You are working all the time, and then you come here and share all of that beauty with us. And I really appreciate it. I could talk to you all day.
Well, let's do
There's
this
just
again.
so much that I've learned from this short conversation, and I've never felt so completely just interested in a while. And I could tell you're a spectacular professor because you had me completely all the information.
You have to ask my students. I don't know what they think about that, but
no, you're incredible. You're incredible, and I've learned so much. And your talk today will teach so many.
I hope
so
it
much.
helps a little.
So
bit.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, and so we will be wrapping up now. Our next webinar is going to be the student panel at 4 p.m. featuring 4 incredible college student musicians who will be sharing their experiences. So I encourage everybody watching and everybody who will be watching and Professor to tune in if possible, or catch it later on recording. Otherwise, thank you so much. Again, you're fantastic. It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope this isn't the last time that I get to speak.
I hope not either, and pleasure was all mine. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.